A midlife crisis is more than just a cultural stereotype. It's a real psychological struggle that can surface between the ages of 40 and 60. Often triggered by aging, loss, or unmet expectations, it can actually lead individuals to question their identity, make impulsive choices, or abruptly abandon long term commitments. While not officially classified yet as a mental illness, the emotional and relational fallout is very real, especially for the spouses and families left behind. This podcast gives voice to those living through the aftermath, exposing the hidden pain, and seeking accountability, healing, and understanding. Thank you for joining us today on MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. Hello, Bomb Squad, and welcome back to MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when the person you love suddenly becomes unrecognizable. They become intensely suspicious. They accuse you of things that never happened. They even begin making reckless financial decisions. They stop sleeping. They start to speak rapidly and jump from subject to subject or become convinced that they've discovered some extraordinary new purpose. Then they abandon their family. They become sexually impulsive. They seem to lose all empathy. They behave in ways that are socially inappropriate or completely out of character for them. They may say that they're finally free, finally enlightened, finally living authentically. And everyone around them says, oh my God, they must be having a midlife crisis. But you guys, what if they're not having a midlife crisis? What if the so-called midlife crisis is actually masking a serious psychiatric illness, a neurological disease, a medication reaction, substance use, or another medical condition affecting the brain? And that's what we're going to try to unmask today. But just know, this episode is educational. I am not a therapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It is not intended to diagnose your spouse, your former spouse, your partner, or family member. But a major change in behavior can have many causes, and only a qualified medical or mental health professional can conduct the proper evaluation. But families often recognize that something is wrong long before the person in crisis is willing to admit it. They may never even admit it, and they may not even recognize it. And sometimes the most dangerous sentence a family can say is, maybe it's just a midlife crisis. So midlife crisis is a cultural description, not a formal psychiatric diagnosis. We generally refer to midlife crisis as someone struggling with aging, identity, mortality, regret, career dissatisfaction, or maybe fears about the future. A person becomes restless. They may question their marriage or career. They may change their appearance. They may buy something super expensive. They may become preoccupied with their youth or search for a sense of excitement. New cars, motorcycles, all kinds of stuff. And that's when we start to say, oh, maybe they're having a midlife crisis. And just because somebody does those things doesn't mean that they have a brain disease or severe mental illness. But the concern begins when the behavior moves beyond dissatisfaction and becomes a substantial break from reality, a substantial break from judgment and cognition and their personality and normal functioning. There's a difference between saying, I'm a little unhappy with my life versus, oh, the TV is sending me secret instructions. That's a big difference, you guys. There's a difference between wanting a new car and spending the family's entire savings during a sleepless, agitated, grandiose state. There's a difference between becoming emotionally distant and no longer recognizing social boundaries, consequences, or the suffering of others, especially the family that you've created. There's a difference between secrecy surrounding an affair and a fixed belief that everyone in the family is conspiring against you. I mean, really? Not every destructive act is caused by illness, but people can lie, cheat, manipulate, abandon, and behave cruelly without being psychotic, manic, or cognitively impaired. Illness should never become a blanket excuse for abuse. However, when behavior changes are severe, rapid, bizarre, and progressive, or accompanied by cognitive or physical symptoms, The possibility of illness should not be dismissed. It's a possibility. And that's why it's so important to look at really deeply at the whole situation. The early stages of psychiatric and neurological illnesses do not always look like illness. They may initially look like selfishness, like, immaturity, an affair, somebody with a little personality change, maybe a sudden spiritual awakening, maybe saying or thinking that they're burned out from their job or career. Maybe there's increased substance abuse, depression, or maybe it is a stereotypical midlife crisis. And the person may still be able to work, drive, use their phone, text, have a real conversation. They may appear perfectly convincing to people who don't know them well. But meanwhile, the spouse and the children are saying, man, mom or dad are not the same as they've been the last 20 or 30 years. What's going on with them? And that history matters, you guys. A clinician may see someone for 30 minutes. A spouse may have 30 years of comparison. And that doesn't mean the spouse can diagnose the condition, but it does mean that the detailed observations from the family may be extremely valuable during an evaluation. Because the question isn't simply, is this behavior bad? The question is, what has changed? When did it change? How dramatically did it change? And what else was happening when that change began? So, the first possibility could be mania or maybe bipolar. Bipolar disorder involves distinct changes in mood, energy, activity, concentration, and functioning. During mania, a person may become unusually energized, euphoric, irritable or agitated, impulsive, grandiose. They may have racing thoughts. They may talk rapidly. They may become more active than usual and need less sleep. They don't need any sleep. They're going to start 5 businesses. They may say they found their soulmate. And they can spend money during this stage like crazy because they think they're about to become incredibly successful. Their confidence may sound compelling and believable, but confidence during mania may be disconnected from realistic circumstances. If they're in a mania situation, it can impair their judgment. It may lead to excessive spending, risky driving, intense arguments, impulsive sexual behavior, or other actions with serious consequences. Severe mania can also involve delusions, hallucinations, or other psychotic symptoms. With bipolar mania, there's a cluster of symptoms: the intensity, the duration, and the degree of impairment. You might want to ask, was the person sleeping? Were they speaking much faster than usual? Were their thoughts difficult to follow? Were they beginning numerous unrealistic projects? Did they believe they had unusual powers or knowledge or wealth or influence, or maybe even a special destiny? Did they start to make dangerous financial or sexual decisions? Did they become severely irritable when challenged? Were there previous periods of maybe profound depression? Did the behavior appear in a defined episode rather than a lifelong pattern? Because a first recognizable manic episode can occur later than families expect. But when symptoms of mania or psychosis emerge for the first time in middle or older age, doctors may also need to investigate medications, substances, neurological illnesses, endocrine problems, hormonal issues, infections, sleep deprivation, and other medical causes. The goal is not to decide at the kitchen table that someone has bipolar. That goal is to recognize, the behavior is extreme enough that professional evaluation is definitely warranted. Another possible condition could be a psychosis or a schizophrenia spectrum condition. Psychosis describes a disruption in a person's ability to distinguish what is real from what is not. Someone experiencing psychosis may have hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking. They may be incoherent or have incoherent speech patterns. or markedly inappropriate behavior. A hallucination involves perceiving something that other people do not perceive. They may hear voices. They may say that they see people or objects that are really not there. They may even feel someone touching them when nothing like that's going on. They may even smell stuff that no one else can detect. A delusion is a firmly held belief that remains in place despite compelling evidence that it is untrue. They may totally believe that their spouse is poisoning them, that the neighbors or somebody is monitoring them, that they're being tracked or stalked. They may be convinced that their telephone has been implanted with a secret device, or that the government is communicating directly with them. They may feel that their family is part of an organized conspiracy. They may think someone's entering the home and moving objects around. They may think a celebrity's secretly in love with them, or that they've been selected for a unique religious or political mission. A person who's paranoid may be highly articulate as well. They may build an elaborate explanation around ordinary events and be very believable. Suddenly, they'll start to say, oh, that car parked across the street is really surveilling us. A misplaced wallet becomes evidence that their spouse is stealing. A family member's concern becomes proof that the entire family is conspiring against them. And the more the family tries to reason with this person, the more suspicious the person may become. Schizophrenia is most commonly diagnosed in late adolescence or early adulthood, typically not during ordinary midlife. However, later onset psychotic disorders can occur, and new psychosis in an older adult requires careful investigation of other psychiatric, neurological, medical, medication-related, and substance-related causes. And this distinction is important because when a 55, 65, or 75-year-old develops psychosis for the first time, the assumption should not automatically be this is late onset schizophrenia, because it could be. It could be that, or it could also be a mood disorder. It could be dementia. It could be delirium, medication reaction, or any of the things we've talked about before. Psychosis is a symptom, but we've got to find the underlying cause. That must be evaluated. Another thing I've talked about before on here is the frontotemporal dementia. This may be one of the conditions most likely to be misinterpreted as a shocking personality change or moral collapse. Frontotemporal dementia, often called FTD, affects areas of the brain involved in behavior, personality, judgment, language, and movement. In behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia, the earliest and most obvious symptoms may involve personality, social behavior, empathy, inhibition, motivation, and judgment rather than memory. And that means the person may still remember names, appointments, and events. They may not look like the public's traditional image of dementia, but underneath they're becoming socially inappropriate, impulsive, emotionally indifferent, maybe crude, compulsive, unusually apathetic. They become repetitive. They become insensitive to others, financially reckless, sexually disinhibited, or strangely unconcerned about consequences. They may lose empathy. They may stop responding to the emotions of their spouse or children. They may say cruel things without appearing to understand why those words are hurtful. They may violate social boundaries that they previously respected. They may begin eating compulsively or develop, unusual food preferences. They may repeat the same behavior over and over and over. They may lose motivation and appear lazy or depressed. They may become fixated on one activity. They may become fixated on one person or one idea. And critically, they may have little or no awareness that they have changed. Their spouse may say, "Hey, honey, you are hurting everyone around you." And the person may appear genuinely indifferent. The family may sit there and go, "Oh my God, they're becoming so narcissistic." And the spouse may interpret it as hatred. Friends may assume the person has finally revealed their true character. Sometimes that interpretation will be correct. A lifelong pattern of entitlement, exploitation, deceit, or lack of empathy is different from a newly emerging neurological syndrome. But in some cases, you guys, a person who was previously responsible, empathetic, socially appropriate, and emotionally connected, they can undergo a progressive transformation. Behavioral variant FTD can produce changes in personality, judgment, and social conduct, even when obvious memory impairment is not initially present. And that's why when we say, oh, but his memory is fine, it doesn't necessarily rule out a neurodegenerative illness. The more important question may be, what happened to their judgment? What happened to their empathy and inhibition? Why is their functioning so different now? Well, another potential could be Lewy body dementia. It can affect thinking, movement, sleep, behavior, and mood. Symptoms of Lewy body dementia can include fluctuations in attention or alertness. It can include visual hallucinations, movement changes, sleep disturbances, confusion, poor judgment, and changes in behavior. Families may notice that the person seems remarkably clear at one moment and then deeply confused. They may see people, animals, or objects that are not there. They may physically act out their dreams. They may develop stiffness, a shuffling walk, that's a big sign, tremors, balance problems, or other movement changes. They may become suspicious or believe that their spouse has been replaced by an imposter. They may accuse a partner of infidelity with no factual basis. They may become frightened in their own home. Other dementias can also cause changes in mood, judgment, personality, emotion, and behavior. Dementia is not merely forgetfulness, and it's not a normal part of aging. Vascular dementia, for example, may involve changes in planning, reasoning, mood, behavior, judgment, and in some cases, hallucinations or delusions. Alzheimer's disease is commonly associated with memory loss, but it can also produce agitation, sleep disruption, suspiciousness, hallucinations, wandering, and other unusual behaviors as the illness progresses. Again, this doesn't mean every angry, forgetful, unfaithful, or inconsiderate middle-aged person has dementia. But it does mean that progressive behavioral change that's accompanied by problems with memory, language, maybe finances, movement, sleep, judgment, or just, different daily functioning. And you know what, you guys, there's also potentially reversible or treatable causes of major behavioral change. And these may include medication side effects or medication interactions, alcohol or drug use, withdrawal from alcohol, sedatives, or other substances, severe sleep deprivation that can cause all kinds of issues, thyroid disorders, vitamin deficiencies, infections, maybe even head injuries, autoimmune or inflammatory conditions, metabolic disturbances, severe depression, delirium. The National Institute of Mental Health notes that psychosis in older adults may arise from physical or mental illness, certain medications, sleep deprivation, alcohol or drug misuse, and diseases including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and related dementias. And this is why a complete evaluation matters. A psychiatric symptom does not always mean the cause is purely psychiatric. The brain is part of the body. When the brain changes, behavior can change too. So here's the deal. You want to focus on a timeline. One of the most useful things a family can do is create a timeline, not a rant, not a character assassination, a factual timeline. Write down what the person was like before the change, then document what began happening and when. For example, January, they were sleeping only maybe 3 hours a night. February, they began spending thousands of dollars unexpectedly. Maybe by March, they were convinced that coworkers were monitoring them. April, well, maybe they started speaking rapidly and making unrealistic business plans. In May, maybe they left the marriage abruptly and claimed a near stranger was their new predestined soulmate. By June, they were accusing family members of stealing and refusing medical care. Do you see a breakdown there? Um, or even maybe not even as month to month, but just over 18 months, you notice they've increasing loss of empathy, inappropriate jokes, compulsive eating, reckless financial decisions, diminished hygiene, problems finding words, indifference to family distress. Maybe there are changes in sleep, speech, mood, memory, movement, driving, sexual behavior, substance use, and abuse. Maybe they were changing their religious or political views, maybe becoming paranoid, making threats, becoming more aggressive. You guys, the timeline may reveal whether the change was sudden, just episodes, or is it progressive? A manic episode may have a distinct beginning and may be accompanied by decreased sleep and increased energy. Delirium may appear suddenly and fluctuate dramatically. A neurodegenerative illness may develop gradually and continue progressing. A long-standing personality disorder usually has roots extending back into earlier adulthood, even if the behavior becomes more obvious under stress. And this might be where we call it dropping a mask. A substance-related condition may correspond with intoxication, withdrawal, or escalating use. And these are not rules that families should use to diagnose someone, but they are patterns that can help a qualified professional know what questions to ask. So now we need to address the part that many members of the bomb squad understand personally, and that is what happens when the behavior change also includes an affair. An affair can make everything much harder to interpret. The secrecy may look like paranoia. The infatuation may look like mania. The rewriting of marital history may look delusional. The adoption of a new identity may look like cognitive decline. The person may idolize the affair partner and demonize the spouse. They may suddenly dress differently, use different language, adopt different interests, and reject everyone associated with their former life. But none of that by itself proves mental illness. Affairs can produce intense infatuation, deception, compartmentalization, emotional dependency, and distorted thinking without meeting the criteria for psychosis, bipolar, or dementia. A person may also use the idea of a breakdown to avoid accountability. And that's why we must resist two extremes. And the two extremes are he made terrible choices, so he must be mentally ill. Or the other extreme, he's choosing this, so there cannot possibly be an illness. Because you guys both can be wrong. Illness and agency can overlap. A person may have an illness that impairs judgment and still cause real harm. A person may have symptoms and also lie. A person may be vulnerable to manipulation and still remain responsible for obtaining help and protecting others. A diagnosis may explain behavior. It does not automatically erase consequences, and it does not require a spouse to remain inside an unsafe blast radius. A professional evaluation becomes especially important when you start to observe new hallucinations, paranoid beliefs, severe confusion, maybe a dramatic reduction in the need for sleep, rapid or incoherent speech, grandiose claims that are disconnected from reality, extreme agitation, sudden reckless spending, dangerous sexual behavior, a severe personality change, loss of empathy accompanied by declining judgment, problems managing familiar tasks, getting lost in familiar places, difficulties with their language, unexplained movement changes of their body, threats of suicide or violence, inability to care for basic needs, maybe even a sudden change following a new medication, illness, infection, fall, or head injury, symptoms that fluctuate sharply over hours or days, any sudden onset of confusion, hallucinations, weakness, facial drooping, speech disturbance, severe headache, loss of consciousness, or other neurological symptoms may require emergency medical attention. Depending on the symptoms, evaluation may begin with a primary care physician, psychiatrist, neurologist, maybe a geriatric psychiatrist, neuropsychologist, or really just the ER. A thorough assessment may include medical history, psychiatric history, neurological examination, laboratory testing, cognitive testing, medication review, assessment of substance use, and when appropriate, brain imaging. And I know, what's really tough here is that many people experiencing mania, psychosis, or certain neurological conditions, they don't recognize that something's wrong. They may believe that everyone else is the problem. They may accuse the spouse of trying to control them. They may refuse appointments. They may appear charming and composed in front of professionals. They may insist that they're healthier than they've ever been and that they've never felt better. And sadly, you guys, sometimes the family cannot force an evaluation unless the person meets the legal criteria for emergency intervention in their jurisdiction. But hopefully, you can get them in to seek professional help. And meanwhile, you've got to protect yourself. You can't personally cure psychosis, mania, addiction, or dementia. And remember, love is not a substitute for medical care. Your spouse they may be ill and you may have been profoundly harmed. Their brain may not be functioning normally, and your children may still be traumatized. They may not fully understand what they're doing, and you may still need legal and physical distance. Your spouse may deserve treatment, and you deserve safety. Families often believe that acknowledging illness means they are no longer allowed to feel angry, but that is not true. An explanation does not remove grief. It does not restore the money that was spent and lost. It doesn't erase public humiliation. It doesn't even repair the relationship with the children. It doesn't undo frightening accusations. It doesn't guarantee that the person will return to who they were. And sometimes there will never be a clear diagnosis. Sometimes the person refuses evaluation completely, and sometimes many doctors disagree. Sometimes the behavior results from several overlapping factors at a time, maybe aging, depression, alcohol, personality traits, trauma, medication, an affair, sleep deprivation, and emerging cognitive decline. Human behavior does not always arrive in a neat little diagnostic box. And I want to emphasize this because social media has turned psychiatric terminology into a kind of relationship shorthand. Like, oh, he's paranoid, so he must be schizophrenic, or she spent so much money, she must be bipolar, or he lost empathy, so he must have frontotemporal dementia, or she forgot an appointment, so she must have Alzheimer's. Nope, you guys, one symptom does not establish a diagnosis. A diagnosis requires careful assessment. Paranoia can occur in psychotic disorders, mood disorders, trauma-related conditions, substance use, dementia, neurological illness, personality disorders, and severe sleep deprivation. Impulsivity can occur during mania, substance use, trauma responses, attention disorders, neurological disease, or simply poor decision-making. Loss of empathy, that can reflect long-standing personality traits, resentment, maybe emotional detachment or depression, maybe neurological disease or deliberate cruelty. Memory problems can arise from stress, grief, depression, medication, sleep problems, hormonal changes, medical illness, or, yes, dementia. But our job as family members is not to name the disease. Our job is to notice when the change is too severe to dismiss. So is it midlife crisis or is it underlying illness? Well, here are some questions to consider. Is the person distressed about aging, purpose, identity, and regret while remaining generally connected to reality? Or are they hallucinating? Are they severely paranoid, confused, grandiose, or really unable to function? Are they making selfish but understandable choices? Or are their choices bizarre, dangerous, and completely disconnected from their previous personality? Are they sleeping normally? Can they have a coherent conversation? Do they understand consequences? Can they manage money, appointments, medications, driving, and daily activities? Do they recognize that something has changed? Is their behavior temporary and situational? Is it occurring in distinct episodes? Or is it progressively worsening? Are there any new, like physical, language, memory, balance, or movement symptoms? Was there a new prescription, a new substance that they are partaking in? Was there a new illness, injury, or a period of profound sleep deprivation? Has anyone obtained a comprehensive medical evaluation? Well, the answer may still be unclear, but these questions can help move the family beyond, oh, he's just going through something, and maybe find the real cause. And for the spouse standing in the blast radius, I want to speak directly to you right now. You may have spent months or years trying to make sense of behavior that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. You may have searched for explanations. Oh, it's a midlife crisis. Oh, they're in an affair fog. Oh, they're so narcissistic. They're depressed. Maybe they're suffering from trauma or addiction. Maybe it's a spiritual crisis, a personality disorder, or brain disease. You may believe that if you can discover the right label, you can discover the solution. But even if you identify the correct explanation, you may not have the power to change the outcome. And that is absolutely one of the most difficult truths in this journey. You are allowed to encourage evaluation. You are allowed to provide information. You're allowed to contact emergency services when someone is dangerous or in danger of inflicting self-harm. You're allowed to protect shared assets through lawful means. You're allowed to advocate for your children. But you are not required to absorb unlimited destruction while waiting for a diagnosis. You are not their neurologist or their psychiatrist. You're not the ER. You are not a locked treatment facility, and you are not medication. You cannot love someone back into reality through sheer force of will. So please stop chasing the blast. So when I say stop chasing the blast, it doesn't mean stop caring. It means stop placing yourself directly in the path of an explosion that you cannot control. You can stand at a safe distance and say, I believe something may be seriously wrong. I hope you accept help, but I will not allow untreated illness, dangerous behavior, or abuse to destroy me and the children. And you guys, that is not abandonment. That is a boundary. And I know there's a temptation to divide people into two categories, like either they're ill and therefore they're innocent, or they're choosing their behavior and therefore they're entirely responsible for consequences. But as we know, real life is more complicated. Different illnesses impair judgment to different degrees. Symptoms fluctuate. Some people retain awareness. Some lose insight. Some accept treatment. Some refuse it. Some may use a diagnosis responsibly, and some may weaponize it. Some family members over-pathologize ordinary selfishness, while others deny obvious illness because acknowledging it is just too frightening for them. But the most responsible position is neither blame nor excuse. It is truth. Like, what is happening? How dangerous is it? What evaluation is needed? What treatment is available? What protection does the family require? What accountability is still appropriate? And what can no longer safely continue? If someone you love has sent you this episode today because they're concerned about you, try not to hear it as an accusation. A medical evaluation does not mean you're weak. It does not mean your family is trying to imprison or control you. It does not mean every choice you have made is invalid. It means that the people who have known you for years have noticed a significant change. Yeah, perhaps they're wrong, but if several trusted people are independently expressing concern, consider being evaluated. Especially if you're barely sleeping, especially if you feel watched or persecuted, especially if you're hearing or seeing things that others do not, especially if your spending, your driving, your sexual behavior, your anger, or your impulsivity has become dangerous, especially if you're having trouble remembering or speaking or navigating or managing familiar tasks, especially if you believe everyone who loves you has suddenly become your enemy. Listen, you deserve to know whether something treatable is affecting your brain. Please know, seeking help does not take away your independence, but untreated illness may take far more from you. So, you guys, not every midlife crisis is mental illness. Not every affair is mania. Not every cruel person has dementia. Not every paranoid statement means they're schizophrenic. And not every dramatic personality change is the revelation of someone's true self. Sometimes behavior is a choice. Sometimes it reflects longstanding character. Sometimes it is a trauma response. Sometimes it is substance related. Sometimes it is psychiatric. And sometimes it is neurological. And sometimes several of those factors exist all at once. The crucial message today is this. When a person's behavior becomes severely erratic, paranoid, grandiose, confused, cognitively impaired, or disconnected from reality, please do not rely solely on the phrase midlife crisis. Look deeper, document the changes, request a medical evaluation, take threats seriously, and you've got to protect your finances, protect children, and protect yourself. And remember that compassion and boundaries can coexist. You can recognize the possibility of illness without volunteering to be destroyed by it. You can hope that someone receives treatment while accepting that you cannot force healing. You can grieve the person they were while responding realistically to the person standing in front of you today. And you can stop chasing the blast long enough to ask a different question. And that question is, are we looking at a crisis of identity? Or are we witnessing a crisis of the brain? Because sometimes that question changes everything. This is Trina Laird, and you have been listening to MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. And to every member of the Bomb Squad trying to understand how someone they loved became someone they barely recognize, please know you are not imagining the change. You are not required to diagnose it. And you don't have to remain inside the blast radius while professionals determine what it means. Until next time, you guys, protect your peace, trust observable reality, and keep moving beyond the bomb drop. Please note, today's episode is intended for general education and support and is not a substitute for medical, psychiatric, neurological, psychological, or legal advice. Do not use this information to diagnose another person. Sudden confusion, hallucinations, severe paranoia, threats of suicide or violence, dangerous behavior, or new neurological symptoms may constitute an emergency. Please contact emergency services or an appropriate crisis provider in your area when immediate safety is at risk. You know, guys, when the bomb dropped in my own marriage, I was completely lost. I was totally blindsided. I'd hardly even heard the term midlife crisis. I equated it with toupees and fast cars. I never imagined that after 27 years, I would be discarded by the man I'd loved for decades, who I thought was my best friend. And I certainly never expected to be facing divorce in my 60s. I had so many questions and so few answers, but I found awesome communities here everywhere, like with Kenda Ruth Stump's group, dealing with your spouse's midlife crisis, and Lori McDermott's group, thewifeexpert.com. These are awesome support resources out there for all of us. And now we have even two more. I just launched a little app. It's called the MLC Bomb Drop Community app. If your bomb drop has just happened, you can start with the emergency 30-day action plan. It's a little step-by-step guide to help you navigate those overwhelming first days because they are extremely overwhelming. You're also going to find checklists to help you stay organized when life feels anything but organized. The app also includes 7 downloadable resource guides. They're just $2 each, or you can get all 7 for just $10. Other than that, everything is available to you totally free. And if you need someone to talk to at 2 o'clock in the morning, your personal AI support companion is available for you 24 hours a day. Simply type what's on your heart and receive thoughtful, caring responses whenever you need them. You'll also have access to an AI journal to help you process your emotions. And if you want to take that a step further, I just dropped a new workbook on Amazon, and that is the After the Bomb Drop workbook. It's a glossy paperback, now $15 on Amazon. This workbook was created to help you move through the aftermath. It's going to help rebuilding your identity. You don't have to decide today whether your marriage is going to survive. You don't have to understand every contradiction. Your first responsibility is to become safe, supported, informed, and grounded enough to take the next healthy step. So to find the app, just go to https://community.mlcbombdrop.com. And for the workbook, just check out Amazon. And just know, nobody should feel like they're facing this alone. You may have been left behind, but you are not alone. There is hope, there is healing, and there truly is life after the blast. Thanks for listening today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Hey, if you have a story you'd like to share with our listeners, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please email mlcbombdrop@gmail.com. Again, that's mlcbombdrop@gmail.com. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. The stories and events discussed in this podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or professional advice. Any names, locations, or identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Any similarities to actual persons, living or dead, or real events are purely coincidental. The information presented on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. Always consult with a qualified expert regarding any decisions related to your specific situation. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the podcast creators.